Today marks the 14th time my family and I have gone through the familiar routine of packing our bags, climbing into our RV, and embarking on yet another hasty departure to a new city. This cycle had become all too familiar to me. It would usually start with an unannounced visit from the police, who would come knocking on our door, question my dad, and eventually leave. My father would then instruct us to gather our belongings, all the while remaining incredibly secretive about the nature of their inquiries. I had grown weary of this nomadic lifestyle. Now that I was 16, I refused to idly stand by and let my dad repeat this process once more. I yearned for more stability, for the chance to establish lasting friendships at school, and for the opportunity to experience the milestones of teenage life, such as finding a girlfriend and sharing my first kiss. Late that night, we piled into the RV and set off on the road. Surprisingly, my mom had ceased her arguments about packing up and relocating. I recalled a time when I was around 7 years old, living in a cozy townhouse. It was fully furnished, and my mom adored it. We stayed there for a blissful 2 years. She had even cultivated a lush green garden and constructed a small chicken coop for fresh eggs. But one day, my dad burst into the kitchen, his face etched with desperation, instructing us to pack our bags. My mother put up a fierce resistance, even threatening to leave my father. Yet, in the end, she relented, bidding farewell to everything she held dear, including her beloved garden. After that, things between my parents were never the same. They grew distant, as if they had become strangers to each other. In the pre-dawn darkness, my dad maneuvered the RV into an empty parking lot. My mother was sound asleep, exhausted from the day's events. My dad instructed me to remain inside while he went off to fetch some food for the journey. I peered out into the parking lot but saw no signs of nearby stores. I began to wonder if my father was being entirely truthful. He strode to the edge of the parking lot, vanishing behind a cluster of trees. My heart raced as I anxiously waited, my mind awash with uncertainty. A short while later, my dad re-emerged, shouldering a large, ominous black duffel bag. He dashed toward the RV and stashed the bag inside the trunk, his movements swift and calculated. Just as my dad was about to step into the RV, a police car pulled up alongside us. My dad remained remarkably composed, greeting the officer with an air of casual indifference. "Anything wrong, officer?" he inquired nonchalantly. The officer trained his flashlight on the RV's window, catching sight of me inside. I offered a timid wave in response. With a skeptical tone, the officer questioned the purpose of our late-night presence. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he inquired. My dad effortlessly spun a tale about us taking a brief rest before continuing our journey on the long road ahead. Sometimes, I marveled at how my dad could weave such convincing lies without a hint of guilt or sounding like a seasoned criminal. Suddenly, a resounding thud echoed from the trunk of the RV. A policeman had struck the trunk, demanding that my dad open it to reveal its contents. My dad, seemingly unfazed, complied with the request, and they both disappeared behind the RV, out of my view. I could only hear a cacophony of crashes and bangs, followed by another loud thud against the rear of the RV. Then, an eerie silence settled over the scene. My dad returned to the driver's seat, wasted no time, and sped away without a word regarding the recent events. He skillfully evaded any discussion about the incident. I opted to push the matter aside as well, allowing the mysteries of that night to remain unexplored. After several days, we arrived at our new home, which was already fully furnished. As I began unloading my bags, a girl from the neighboring house waved at me. "Hi, I'm Ruby," she greeted me with a captivating smile. Her allure was undeniable, with tanned, shapely legs that were accentuated by her rather short skirt. I couldn't help but be captivated by her presence. Lost in thought, I stumbled over a box in our driveway, spilling its contents. "Silly me," I mumbled. Neglecting to properly secure my bag, I watched in mortification as my belongings tumbled to the ground. Ruby rushed over to assist me, bending down to pick up my underwear and a soiled sock. She chuckled lightly, remarking, "These need to go to the laundry." My face turned a deep shade of crimson, but I joined in her laughter. Ruby then beckoned the man from the neighboring house, presumably her father, and excused herself. "I've got to run, see you later," she bid me farewell before departing. As my family settled into our new home, my mother began tending to a garden, which brought me great joy. I observed my dad unloading the mysterious black duffel bag into the garage that night. Unable to contain my curiosity, I made a clandestine trip to the garage when everyone was asleep, intent on uncovering the secrets hidden within the bag. As I unzipped it, the startling contents left me in utter shock. Inside the mysterious black duffel bag, I uncovered a police uniform complete with a badge, an apparently empty gun holster, several envelopes, and a jumble of miscellaneous documents. Yet, nothing could have prepared me for the next discovery. Nestled at the bottom of the bag lay a photograph of a girl, devoid of any identifying information except for a date written on the back, November 16, 2004. Just as I was lost in puzzlement, my dad's voice startled me, and I turned to see him standing there. Caught red-handed, I had to act swiftly. "Dad, what's going on? What are all these things? What happened to the policeman?" I fired a barrage of questions, anxiety gripping me. My father's response was utterly absurd. "Son, we're not running away at all," he explained with an air of nonchalance. "This is just some Halloween costume stuff. I want to surprise your mom, with some grown-up things." With that, he swiftly closed the bag and instructed me to return to bed. Sleep remained elusive that night as my thoughts raced. Restlessly tossing and turning, I found myself in a dream where Ruby and I were swimming in the ocean. As she began to drown, I swam to her rescue, just as she was about to express her gratitude with a kiss. But then, my father intruded into the dream, wielding a gun, his face wearing an eerie expression as he chanted, "Grown-up stuff, grown-up stuff." I awoke in a cold sweat, convinced that my father was hiding something significant. I felt an urgent need to uncover the truth. The following day, I started my first day at the new school, and to my surprise, Ruby was there as well. Fortunately, we shared the same classroom, and she introduced me to her circle of friends, who all exuded a welcoming vibe. Ruby's beauty continued to captivate me, and during math class, I couldn't help but steal glances at her. My daydream abruptly shattered when the teacher slammed the table, prompting laughter from the entire class. Ruby, wearing a friendly smile, caught my eye. A guy seated behind me chimed in, "You'll get used to Ruby. She has that effect on all of us." During recess, Ruby graciously invited me to join her and her friends, instantly making me feel like part of their close-knit group. They led me to their clandestine hangout spot, hidden from prying teachers' eyes. This was where they indulged in activities such as making out, copying homework, and playing music without fear of being caught. Tucked away behind an abandoned classroom near a warehouse yard, the location offered a view of the warehouse itself. As the bell signaled the end of the break, we all rose to return to class. Walking behind the group, I noticed a lone figure standing in the warehouse yard, as if awaiting someone. The situation felt decidedly suspicious. Suddenly, an unmarked black car appeared seemingly out of thin air. A man in a black suit emerged from the car, and my eyes widened in disbelief. It was my dad. I watched in bewilderment as my father handed the man a substantial envelope. The man meticulously inspected its contents before exchanging it for a bundle of money, which he handed to my dad. My father scanned the surroundings, then climbed back into the car, which promptly drove away. "Are you coming?" called Ruby, snapping me back to reality. I hurriedly followed the group. At dinner that night, my dad exhibited his usual behavior, and I couldn't discern any signs of nervousness in his demeanor. The mystery of his actions momentarily took a back seat, as my thoughts gravitated towards my newfound neighbor, Ruby. Later, when everyone was sound asleep, I gazed out of my upstairs bedroom window and spotted Ruby lying on her bed, listening to music. Even in her pajamas, she appeared even more captivating, and I couldn't help but admire her as she gazed out of her own window. I quickly ducked to avoid Ruby spotting me staring at her. After a brief pause, I cautiously peeked through my window once more. To my relief, she remained in the same position, seemingly unaware of my observation. Satisfied that I had gone unnoticed, I turned my gaze towards our backyard, where my mom was engrossed in her gardening. Unexpectedly, a rustling noise emanated from one of the bushes. My initial thought was of a potential burglar, but upon closer inspection, I realized it was my dad. He held binoculars, peering intently over the fence. I couldn't fathom who had captured his interest. Luckily, Ruby had turned off her bedside lamp, shielding me from her view. My dad hesitated for a moment before making a daring move. He vaulted over the fence. My heart raced as I questioned his intentions. Was he planning something unusual? A break-in, perhaps? I couldn't believe my eyes as he stealthily approached Ruby's bedroom window. Lowering himself and moving along the side of the house, he held a peculiar device in his hand, its small light flashing intermittently. He eventually located an open window leading to her living room. With a sense of dread, he reached inside, his fingers extending through the window. After a few tense moments, he withdrew from Ruby and her family's space, but the mysterious device had vanished. My mind swirled with questions, haunted by the dark secrets my father might be harboring. Leaving my room to head for the bathroom, I unexpectedly encountered my father in the hallway. He appeared startled by my presence. "Where have you been?" I inquired. "Just returning from a late-night walk, getting some fresh air." "Good night, son," he replied, his tone casual and convincing. My father's adeptness at deception left me with no choice but to let him go, but I resolved to keep a vigilant watch over Ruby to ensure her safety. The following day, after school, I mustered the courage to invite Ruby to join me for a walk in the park. To my delight, she looked even more charming in her casual attire than she did in her school uniform. As we strolled through the park, a sudden gust of wind caught us both off guard, lifting her skirt and causing her cheeks to flush with embarrassment. My attention was so captivated that I didn't notice a lamp post ahead, and I inadvertently walked right into it. My face turned as red as a tomato, and we shared a burst of laughter at my clumsy misstep. After that amusing incident, our conversation flowed effortlessly. Ruby decided to surprise me by fetching some ice cream. She suggested I wait on a bench near a gentleman engrossed in his newspaper. Although the paper veiled his face, there was something oddly familiar about him. In a sudden twist, the man looked at me with astonishment. "Son, what are you doing here?" It was my father. Confused and anxious, I questioned his presence. "Dad, what's going on? You need to leave right away. Please, go." His behavior was bizarre, but my plea came too late. At that very moment, an unknown figure approached my father. In the blink of an eye, they exchanged 2 envelopes without so much as a glance at each other. The mysterious man vanished as swiftly as he had appeared. My father turned to me, regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to witness that, son. I never wanted you to be involved." Numerous questions swirled in my mind, but our conversation was interrupted as Ruby approached with ice cream in hand. Just as I was about to introduce my father to her, she seemed to have seen a ghost. Her hands trembled, and she dropped both ice creams. My father greeted her with a simple "Hello, Ruby." Tears welled up in her eyes as she struggled to process the situation. "Dad? Wait, what? Did I just hear Ruby call my father Dad?" Within moments, Ruby was embracing my dad, and I could have sworn I saw tears in his eyes too. He instructed me urgently, "Son, take Ruby home right away. No one must see us together." Ruby looked at me with a perplexed expression and promised, "I'll explain everything later." During our walk back home, Ruby confided in me, revealing an astonishing secret. She had been abducted from the hospital as a baby, and the man who had taken her, while being a loving father, was also a notorious criminal. Her true biological father had recently found her, and shockingly, it turned out to be my dad as well. Ruby delivered the news matter-of-factly, stating, "I guess that makes us brother and sister." My head was spinning with confusion and disbelief. Did my mother even have any knowledge of this revelation? I felt an overwhelming urge to scream and cry, but Ruby emphasized the importance of keeping this information a secret, urging me to go home and wait for everything to make sense. I spent that night in bed, avoiding both my father and Ruby. Around 10 p.m., there came an unexpected knock on our door, and I had a gut feeling that it was the police. Indeed, it was. I overheard my father opening the door, and I listened to their exchange. They inquired, "Are you ready?" To which my dad responded, "I've been ready for 10 years. What transpired next was nothing short of chaos. The sounds of police sirens and raised voices emanated from the neighboring house. I sprinted outside to witness a scene of police cars and officers surrounding Ruby's home. Emerging from the house was my father, donned in a police uniform and escorting Ruby's father in handcuffs. For the past decade, unbeknownst to me, my dad had been an undercover FBI agent relentlessly pursuing the man who had stolen his daughter as a baby. The mysterious envelopes he exchanged contained crucial information and documents pertaining to Ruby's whereabouts. As he delved deeper into his investigation, it became evident that the man was a dangerous criminal. The photograph of the girl I had discovered in the black bag was none other than Ruby herself. In an astonishing twist, Ruby was my sister, and all those years, we had not been running from the police. Instead, we were part of a covert operation aimed at bringing a criminal to justice.